Welcome to Downshift. My name is Matt and I'm here with Honda's new Prologue, thanks to my friends at Russ Darrow Honda. And the Prologue is Honda's answer to things like the Tesla Model Y, Hyundai Ioniq 5, and Chevy Blazer EV. And today we're going to see just how it stacks up to some of those rivals in the best and the rest. Let's get into it. The first thing that we're going to talk about is not even necessarily a con, it's just something maybe that you would notice if you spend time, like me, in a bunch of other cars. And it's the fact that this is not exactly a purebred Honda, in the sense that it's a GM collaboration. This is GM's chassis, the Ultium chassis, this is GM's motors, this is GM's battery, but the fact is, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because GM has dumped billions of dollars into development of that chassis and that architecture. We just had a go in the Cadillac Lyriq, which uses a lot of the same components under the skin here, and I loved that thing. Now, there's a couple other things on a more intimate level that you'll experience day to day, like the seats are pretty recognizably GM. A lot of the switch gears for the windows, the start-stop, the volume, the steering wheel, the regen paddle, the climate controls, the graphics on some of the technology and the screens, the sounds and the chimes. The key fob is obviously GM, but no Super Cruise, obviously, so they keep one of the nicest features to themselves. But all of that is GM. Now, that's not necessarily to say that it's bad, it's just something that you should maybe know if you care about that sort of thing, if you're a Honda purist or something like that. But the question then becomes, what did Honda do exactly? Well, they did a lot of the exterior design. So what you see and interact with on a day-to-day basis, that's Honda. They've also addressed where the buttons are placed for the most part. And they also did the dash design. But again, this collaboration with GM is not to say that it's bad. It's not early 2000s GM where it's really kind of cheap and chintzy. This is a very solid interior and a very solid exterior and a very solid platform. So it's just, if you care about having a purebred Honda, if you're a purist, just something to maybe know. But it's not exactly a con, it's just something that we have to note here in the video for being thorough. And then when it does come to cargo space, we do have to ding it a little bit just in relative terms to other things it competes against, because as you can see, the space here is not exactly impractical. But when you take a look at the numbers, it is about 25.7 cubic feet versus the 30.5 in the Blazer EV. You get about 40 cubic feet in the Passport and 38 in the CR-V. So about 10 to 13 less cubic feet in this Prologue than you get in something like a CR-V. Now you can fold the seats down. It's going to give you about 57 cubic feet of space. Again, slightly less than the Blazer, but by no means impractical. The load floor is a little bit high, but you get an incredibly deep underfloor cubby, and you get tie downs, you get lights, you get an outlet. The only thing is there is no frunk, so this is your full cargo area, and it's just, by the numbers, a little bit smaller than some of the other competitors. And it's not exactly what I would consider sporty. Now, the most powerful and performance-oriented Prologue would be the dual motor one, of course. So you get two motors, one front, one rear, 288 horsepower, 333 pound-feet of torque, 0 to 60 in just under 6 seconds. You can also get a single motor front wheel drive. That's going to be 212 horsepower and 236 pound-feet of torque. So it's not fast, and it's about the least powerful, at least when you compare it to things like a Model Y, an EV6, an Ioniq 5. But in sport mode, it does make a little bit of sound. But that's really okay, because it doesn't say SI on it anywhere, it doesn't say Type R on it anywhere, and it's really efficient, and it's really nice to drive. It's just not nice to drive hard. But there's a very positive side to that coin, which we'll talk about in a minute. But then getting into some of the good stuff, we're going to talk about the meat and potatoes, range and charging. Now, what's under the skin is an 85 kilowatt hour battery, and you're going to get that size no matter what, front wheel drive, all wheel, whatever. And for front wheel drive, it's going to be good for 296 miles of range. Again, that's single motor front wheel drive, and that is pretty dang good. If you go for all wheel drive, it's going to drop to 281 miles, so not a huge hit in terms of range. And if you go for the Elite with some more aggressive tires, it's going to drop a little bit more, about 8 more miles to 273. But even still, that is the most range for the least amount of money. Most usually hover around the 250 to 260 mark in terms of range. For charging, you can add about 60 miles in 10 minutes, or if you use a level 2 at home like myself, you can charge about 10 to 80% in 10 hours. And make sure you check the link in the description for an Emporia wall charger. And on top of that, Honda is actually going to give you 3 different options when you buy a Prologue. You can either take some credits to charge outside of your house, you can get some credits to get a mobile charger, or what I would do is take take some of that money and credits that they're going to give you and invest in an Emporia wall charger. Again, there's a link in the description that's going to save you a little bit of money. So Honda's got your back if you need to transform your garage or your house to charge your Prologue at home. And when it comes to styling, I think the Prologue is actually really handsome. This Touring here is draped in Sonic Gray, which looks fantastic in bright midday sunlight. But the general design looks cool. It's simple, it's modern looking, it's almost a little futury cartoony, but you've got a simple LED running light. You have no grille per se, but it still has a pretty familiar Honda face. You've got LED fog lights down at the bottom, and you've got cool wheel options. You can get up to 21-inch wheels, which are the biggest ever fitted to a Honda. But the profile is clean, it looks long, and you can see the wheels are pushed to the extreme ends of the car. It rides low and long and classy. And the rear end design is very clean and mirrors the front with the lighting. And you've got a rear skid plate looking bumper. So leave it down in the comments what you think looks better, the Prologue or the Blazer EV. So earlier we talked about how this thing isn't exactly sporty, but I'm very okay with that because the balance of what you get here is very comfortable. This is probably what I would want from reasonably the next step from a CR-V hybrid or something like that. It's very smooth, it's very refined, the cabin is incredibly quiet, the visibility is excellent, the ride is fantastic. It's so easy and nice to just cruise along. And this is one of the most efficient in terms of its range and its power usage, and it gets you some of the most range. So it's just easy and nice to drive from a day-to-day perspective, which is probably what you're going to want from your EV anyway. I don't know if people are tracking their EVs. So what you have is a very nice complete package that you can drive on the road. And I know earlier in the video we talked about the General Motors influence with this entire car here, and that is true. But when you step into the interior, Honda has had a hand in styling, button placement, and some of the reskinnings of some of the software. And what it comes together as from a cabin experience is really nice. You got heated and you can get cooled seats on your top trim. You can get a heated steering wheel. The brown interior, if you want that, is only on the Elite. The Touring and everything else is going to get this black interior that we have here. But then touching on that General Motors influence, they seem to have touched everything. A lot of the switchgear is General Motors. So what did Honda do? Well, they chose where the buttons were for the most part, so the ergonomics make Honda sense. And Honda went so far as to design the dashboard as well. You've got some ambient lighting depending on trim. You've got a 12-speaker Bose system on your Touring and up, so we've got it here. And this isn't like the early 2000s where you hear GM interior and then you run for the hills. This is a well-appointed, pretty solid, and seemingly durable and nice to look at cabin, so I'm not mad about it. And then we'll take a look at the rear seats, which, as you can see, I'm 6'1", sitting behind myself. Spacious, palatial even. Headroom is not quite as palatial. If I was wearing my hat, I would hit my nub, but you have this glorious panoramic sunroof. You've got dual map pockets back here. The seats themselves are comfortable. The floor is a little bit high because of battery stuff, but that means your floor is completely flat, which is really nice. You've got vents back here, dual USB-Cs, some contrasted gold stitching to brighten things up. You've got, of course, some cup holders. And it's really nice. It's not much to complain about in the back seat of the Prologue. And then moving back up to the front, when you talk about the tech suite, you can get pretty much anything that you would want in here, so long as you option for the right trim and spend enough money. Like for one, we're in the Touring trim, which the only trim above this is the Elite, but that's what you're going to have to go to if you want the head-up display, the Elite trim. But there are some really nice things that you get as standard. For one, you get this 11-inch digital cluster as standard. It feels maybe a little Chevy, but it looks good, and if you don't spend a lot of time in Chevys, you wouldn't even notice. You also get an 11.3-inch touchscreen for your center stack, and you've got Google built in, which is a little bit GM, but again, if you're not familiar with it, it's not going to be a problem, and it's not like it's a problem regardless anyway. It gets you things like wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and you can even project your maps in your instrument cluster, so it's not even that big a deal to not have a head-up display. And maybe it's a good thing, ultimately, that you have a lot of GM influence, because I know a lot of my friends with Civic Type Rs have some connection issues, and here, there hasn't really been much of a problem. And one of my favorite things, I don't know why I like this so much, but you've got this wireless charger right here, which frees up this area nice, and it's vertical, so it's just a nice place to easily drop your phone. I don't know, I just like it. But the tech here, very good. The only thing that you're missing is a head-up display, but you can get that in the Elite trim. And one of the last things we'll talk about is the almighty dollar, the important price. And it's priced really well. The Prologue starts at $47,000. This thing's sibling, the Chevy Blazer EV, and the base LT trim starts at just under $49,000. So this Prologue ends up being a little less than $2,000 more affordable than the Chevy. And $47,000 is exactly where you're going to start for your Hyundai Ioniq 5, but that's going to get you the standard range, which is not going to compete with the range that you get here. And on top top of that, Honda is going to offer you the $7,500 rebate right on top if you go ahead and lease this vehicle, which is something that we're seeing Hyundai do and some of the other competitors as well. So you can save yourself even more money. So $47,000 then becomes about 40 grand if you go ahead and lease this thing. So some things to consider. Make sure, of course, you ask your dealer for whatever special incentives are going on at the time that you purchase, but this thing ends up being quite a value. And before we strap on our GoPro and go for a little bit of a drive, there's just a couple little odds and ends. Like for one, this is where I would expect the hazard lights to be, but it's actually up here. Make sure you know where this is before you get in the car, in case you have a little bit of an emergency. And a lot of people think EVs can't tow, but this thing will tow 1,500 pounds, which is, I believe, right on par with a CR-V, so that's not too bad. And this is something we've seen on some of the other GMs. You go into here, you don't have headlight controls on your dash. You have to go into the screen, and then you can adjust your headlights. But you have automatic high beams, so the fact is you're probably not going to need to control these independently very much. Automatic headlights and automatic high beams. Really nice. Now let's go for a drive. And just like in the Lyriq that I like so much, got the regen paddle here, so my wife would love it. You've also got a family-friendly feature here called Buckle to Drive, where the car won't put itself into drive until you actually have the seatbelt buckled. Good turning circle. I like this cup holder. It's big, it's oversized. It doesn't grab super tight, so if I go through a corner, this does flop around a little bit, but overall, it's really not bad. Now this thing, not being the Elite trim, also doesn't get a sport mode, but we're gonna launch it anyway. Here we are, in the Prologue. And 60. So it's not super fast, but to be honest, that's totally fine because it is incredibly smooth. It is quiet. It is refined. This is, I think, a help to Honda. What is rattling around in here? It's my own stuff. Maybe it's not my own stuff. Okay, so there's a rattle going on somewhere. Ooh, I did not notice that. We're getting live impressions. Anyway, so I think what I was gonna say before the rattle interrupted me is this is a great step for Honda to be considered more luxury. And that's just kind of the inherent EV thing. It's smooth, it's quick, it's really refined in the cabin, it's quiet for the most part. And it's just nice to drive. It's inoffensive to drive. It's easy to step in. The back seats are big. The trunk is big enough. You know, there's nothing about this that's offensive or bad in any way, really. It's not super fast, but it doesn't say SI on it. It doesn't say Type R on it. It's not pretending that it is fast. There's no like red, crazy performance stuff going on. So it's just a nice, comfortable, easy driving Honda that happens to be electric, and it feels nice. It feels expensive. The leather feels pretty good, even though it's synthetic. The stitching is kind of nice. You got some contrast here, and then a different color contrast on the seats there. It's like a gold, which I kind of like. Let's not just throw red or, you know, white at everything. Let's add a little bit of upscale touch and a little bit of luxury touch with a little bit of gold. I think that's nice. I guess, you know, there's not really a whole lot more to say. It's just smooth, it's well calibrated, you can roll on power. It's well done. It's well done. Am I bothered by the fact that it's largely a Chevy Blazer underneath? Not really, no. I think the exterior speaks Honda. The interior, if you don't spend time in Chevys, will feel relatively Honda. All of the knobs, buttons, and switches make sense. It's easy to live with. It's a good car. So with that, let's get into the final thoughts. So that is the best and the rest of the new Honda Prologue. Thanks again to my friends at Rustero Honda for letting me take a look at the new Prologue. Now, while it may not be the most powerful, the most performance-oriented, it's not necessarily supposed to be that, but what it is stylish, it's smooth, it's subtle, and it's actually a really nice thing to live with. It's easy to drive, and for that reason, I like it. It makes sense in Honda's umbrella. But again, thank you to my friends at Rustero for letting me have a go. We'll see you in the next one.